The weather app on her phone showed partly cloudy skies with a chance of light snow. Nothing to worry about, it said. Just a typical December day in the mountains. Lisa had made this drive dozens of times before, winding through the mountain roads to visit her sister who lived in the small town of Pine Valley. The familiar route usually took about 3 hours, and she always enjoyed the peaceful drive through the forest. Her 6-month-old daughter slept peacefully in the car seat behind her, tiny hands curled into little fists. The baby had been fussy all morning, but the gentle motion of the car had finally lulled her to sleep. Lisa smiled in the rearview mirror at her daughter's peaceful face. This was supposed to be a simple weekend visit. Her sister had been asking to meet the baby for months, and Lisa finally felt ready to make the trip. The first snowflakes started falling around noon, light and gentle, dancing in front of her windshield like tiny white butterflies. Lisa turned on her wipers and continued driving. Mountain weather was unpredictable, but she had snow tires and plenty of experience driving in winter conditions. The radio played soft music and everything felt normal. But within 20 minutes, everything changed. The snow began falling harder, transforming from gentle flakes into thick, heavy chunks that stuck to her windshield faster than her wipers could clear them. The wind picked up, howling around her small sedan and rocking it slightly on the narrow mountain road. Lisa slowed down, gripping the steering wheel tighter as visibility dropped dramatically. She had never seen weather change so quickly. One moment she could see the road clearly ahead, and the next moment she was driving through what felt like a thick white curtain. The familiar landmarks disappeared behind the swirling snow. The trees on either side of the road became ghostly shadows, barely visible through the storm. Her phone, mounted on the dashboard, showed no signal bars. The mountains always had spotty coverage, but now she had nothing at all. She tried not to panic. She just needed to drive slowly and carefully until she reached the main highway. From there, the road was wider and better maintained. But the storm had other plans. The wind grew stronger, pushing against her car with surprising force. Snow was accumulating on the road faster than the occasional snowplow could clear it. Lisa's small car began struggling to maintain traction on the increasingly slippery surface. She could feel the tires sliding slightly with each turn, and her heart began racing. Behind her, the baby started crying, sensing her mother's growing anxiety. Lisa tried to stay calm, speaking softly to comfort her daughter while focusing on the road ahead. "It's okay, sweetheart, we're almost there. Just a little bit more." Then she saw the curve ahead, a sharp bend in the road that she had driven through countless times before. She pressed gently on the brakes, knowing that sudden movements could cause her to skid. But as she entered the turn, she felt the terrifying sensation of her car losing control. Time seemed to slow down. The steering wheel felt useless in her hands as the car began sliding sideways across the icy road. She pumped the brakes carefully, trying to regain control, but the car continued its sideways slide toward the edge of the road. Through her passenger window, she could see the steep drop-off that fell away into the forest below. The car hit the snowbank at the road's edge with a soft thump, then tilted as the right side wheels went over the edge. For a moment, Lisa thought the car might flip completely, but it came to rest at an angle, the passenger side much lower than the driver's side. The engine sputtered and died. Lisa sat in stunned silence for a moment, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Behind her, the baby was crying louder now, scared by the sudden movement and stop. Lisa's hands shook as she tried to restart the car. The engine turned over once, twice, but wouldn't catch. On the third try, it made a grinding noise and then nothing. She was stuck, looking out her windows. Lisa could barely see anything through the heavy snow. The storm had become a full blizzard, with wind howling so loudly it sounded like a freight train. Snow was already beginning to accumulate on her windshield, and she realized with growing horror that her car would soon be completely buried. The temperature was dropping fast. Even with the car's heater off, she could feel the cold seeping in through the windows and doors. Her breath began forming small clouds in the air, and she knew that without the engine running, The car would become an icebox within hours. She tried her phone again, holding it up in different positions, hoping for even one bar of signal. Nothing. The screen showed "no service" in the corner. Those two words that now felt like a death sentence. She was completely cut off from the outside world, trapped in a disabled car with her baby. In the middle of a mountain blizzard, Lisa looked back at her daughter, who was still crying but not as loudly now. The baby's cheeks were getting red from the cold, and Lisa realized she needed to make a decision quickly. She could stay in the car and hope that someone would come looking for them when they didn't arrive at her sister's house. But her sister wasn't expecting them at any specific time, and it could be hours or even days before anyone realized they were missing, or she could take the baby and try to walk to safety. The thought terrified her. She had maybe 2 miles of supplies in her diaper bag, and she was wearing only regular winter clothes, not the kind of gear needed for hiking through a blizzard. But as she sat in the rapidly cooling car, watching snow pile up on the windows, she realized that staying put was not an option. She had read stories about people who died in their cars during blizzards, found days later just yards from safety. The thought of her daughter suffering that fate made the decision for her. They had to try to walk out. Lisa began gathering everything useful she could find in the car. The diaper bag had a few bottles, some baby food, and a small pack of crackers she had been saving for the drive. She found an emergency blanket in the trunk, one of those thin metallic ones that folded up small. She wrapped the baby in every blanket she had, creating a warm cocoon, then fashioned a carrier using her scarf and jacket to hold her daughter against her chest before leaving the car. Lisa took one last look around, trying to memorize any landmarks she could see through the snow. She needed to remember where the car was in case she had to come back. She also left a note on the dashboard, just in case someone found the car before finding them. Taking a deep breath, Lisa opened the car door and stepped out into the blizzard. The wind hit her like a physical blow, and snow immediately stung her face. The cold was so intense it took her breath away. But with her daughter pressed against her chest, she began walking into the white wilderness, following what she hoped was still the road beneath the snow. She had no idea that she was about to begin a 19-mile journey that would test every ounce of strength and determination she possessed. The first step into the blizzard felt like walking into a freezer. The wind hit Lisa so hard it nearly knocked her backward, and snow immediately began sticking to her face and clothes. She pulled her hood tighter and pressed her daughter closer to her chest, trying to shield the baby from the worst of the storm. Walking through the deep snow was like trying to move through thick mud. Each step required enormous effort as she lifted her feet high to clear the drifts that were already knee-deep in some places. Her regular winter boots, which had seemed perfectly adequate that morning, were already soaked through after just a few minutes of walking. The road, which she had driven on hundreds of times, was now completely unrecognizable. The familiar yellow lines were buried under white, and the edges where the pavement met the forest had disappeared entirely. Lisa tried to stay in what she thought was the center of the road, but with visibility reduced to just a few feet in any direction, she wasn't even sure she was still on the right path. Her daughter whimpered against her chest, and Lisa could feel the baby's little body trembling with cold despite all the blankets wrapped around her. The makeshift carrier was working, but Lisa's back and shoulders were already aching from the weight and the awkward position. Every few minutes, she stopped to adjust the baby and checked that her daughter was still breathing normally. The cold was unlike anything Lisa had ever experienced. It seemed to seep through every layer of clothing, finding its way past her jacket, through her sweaters, and straight to her skin. Her fingers, even inside her gloves, began to lose feeling within the first half hour. Her toes followed soon, after becoming painful and then numb inside her wet boots, but she kept walking, one foot in front of the other. Step after step through the endless white, the wind never stopped howling. It came from different directions, sometimes pushing her forward, sometimes trying to knock her sideways, and sometimes hitting her face on like a wall of ice. The snow wasn't just falling anymore. It was being driven horizontally by the wind, creating a whirlwind of white that made it impossible to see where she was going. After what felt like hours, Lisa began to doubt herself. Had she been walking In circles? Was she even still on the road? The landscape around her looked the same in every direction, just trees and snow and more snow. She had no landmarks to guide her, no way to tell if she was making progress or just wandering deeper into the wilderness. Her legs burned with exhaustion. The muscles in her thighs and calves screamed with every step as she forced herself to lift her feet out of the deep snow over and over again. The carrier straps dug into her shoulders, and the baby's weight seemed to increase with every mile, but she couldn't stop. Stopping meant dying, and her daughter's life depended on her keeping moving. The crackers from her purse became her lifeline. She ate them one at a time, trying to make them last, but her body was burning energy so fast that she was constantly hungry. She learned to scoop up clean snow in her mouth to stay hydrated, letting it melt on her tongue. The cold water helped a little, but it also made her core temperature drop even more. As the hours passed, Lisa began to notice changes in her thinking. Simple decisions became difficult. She would stop walking and forget why she had stopped. Sometimes she found herself staring at a tree for long minutes, unable to remember what she was supposed to be doing. She recognized these as signs of hypothermia, and the knowledge terrified her. Her daughter's cries became weaker and less frequent, which scared Lisa even more than her own condition. The baby was getting colder, and Lisa could feel her little body losing its fight against the freezing temperature. She tried to share her own body heat, opening her jacket and pressing the baby directly against her chest, but she wasn't sure. It was helping. The daylight began to fade, and Lisa realized with growing panic that she had been walking for many hours without seeing any signs of civilization. No cars had passed on the road, if she was even still on the road. No houses, no power lines, no anything that suggested human presence. Just endless forest and snow and the terrible, constant wind. When darkness finally fell, the temperature dropped even further. Lisa's body began shaking uncontrollably, not just from cold, but from exhaustion. Her legs felt like rubber, barely able to support her weight. Several times she stumbled and fell, landing hard in the snow with her daughter pressed against her. Each time it took longer to get back up. The darkness made everything worse. Without even the dim light from the cloudy sky, Lisa couldn't see anything at all. She had to feel her way forward with her feet, trying to sense whether she was still on solid ground or about to step off the road into a ditch. Every shadow looked like a threat. Every sound from the wind sounded like something dangerous approaching. Her mind began playing tricks on her. She thought she heard cars in the distance or voices calling her name, but when she stopped to listen, there was only the wind. Sometimes she thought she saw lights through the trees, but when she stumbled toward them, they vanished like mirages. She began to understand how people got lost and died just yards from safety. The cold and exhaustion created hallucinations that led them in the wrong direction. The baby had stopped crying altogether now, which was the most frightening thing of all. Lisa checked on her daughter constantly, putting her face close to the baby's mouth to make sure she was still breathing. The little girl's skin felt cold to the touch, and her tiny lips had a bluish color that made Lisa's heart pound with fear. Lisa's own body was shutting down. Her hands were so numb she couldn't feel them anymore, and her feet felt like blocks of ice inside her boots. Moving her fingers was almost impossible, and she had to be careful not to drop the baby because her grip was so weak. Her thoughts became fuzzy and confused, and she had to concentrate hard just to remember why she was walking, but something deep inside her refused to quit. Every time she wanted to lie down in the snow and rest, she looked at her daughter's face and found the strength to take another step. Maternal instinct pushed her forward when logic told her to give up. Love became stronger than exhaustion, more powerful than the cold. She had no idea how far she had walked or how much further she had to go. The road seemed to stretch on forever through the darkness and snow, but she kept moving one painful step at a time, carrying her precious cargo through the worst storm of her life. In the back of her mind, she clung to the hope that somewhere ahead in the darkness, there would be shelter, warmth, and safety. She just had to keep walking until she found it. Lisa had lost all sense of time. The darkness felt endless, and every step had become a battle against her own body. Her legs moved like they belonged to someone else, heavy and clumsy, barely responding to her commands. She couldn't feel her feet anymore. Couldn't tell if she was stepping on solid ground or about to fall into a hole. The only thing that mattered was the weight of her daughter against her chest and the tiny puff of warm breath she could still feel against her neck. Her mind drifted in and out of focus. Sometimes she forgot where she was or why she was walking through the snow. She would stop suddenly, confused, looking around at the swirling white darkness as if seeing it for the first time. Then her daughter would shift slightly in the carrier, and reality would crash back. She was walking to save their lives. She had to keep moving. The hallucinations were getting worse. She kept seeing her own car appearing through the snow, thinking she had somehow walked in a circle back to where she started. But when she stumbled toward it, desperate for shelter, it would fade away like smoke. Once, she was convinced she saw her sister standing by the road, waving at her to come home. Lisa called out, her voice cracking and weak, but there was no one there. Her body temperature was dropping dangerously low. She knew the signs from health classes she had taken years ago, but knowing about hypothermia and experiencing it were two completely different things. Her thinking was becoming sluggish and confused. Simple decisions took enormous effort. Should she rest for a moment? Should she eat her last cracker now or save it? These questions felt overwhelming in her current state. The baby hadn't made a sound in hours, and this silence terrified Lisa more than anything else. She kept checking, pressing her ear close to her daughter's face to hear the shallow breathing, feeling for the weak but steady heartbeat. The little girl's skin was cold to the touch, and her tiny lips had turned a frightening shade of blue. Lisa tried to share more of her own body heat, but she was losing that battle too. Just when Lisa felt her legs might finally give out completely, when she thought she couldn't take even one more step, something changed in the darkness ahead. At first, she thought it was another hallucination, a tiny flicker of yellow light barely visible through the swirling snow. She blinked hard, sure it would disappear like all the others, but it didn't disappear. If anything, it seemed to get slightly brighter as she stared at it. Lisa's heart began beating faster, pumping what little energy she had left through her frozen body. She changed direction, stumbling through deeper snow toward the light. With each difficult step, the glow became more distinct. It wasn't the cold white light of her hallucinations. This was warm and golden, the unmistakable color of firelight, or lamplight. A building began to take shape through the storm. At first, just a dark shadow against the white, but as she got closer, Lisa could make out the outline of a small log cabin. Smoke rose from a stone chimney, barely visible against the dark sky, but carrying the wonderful smell of burning wood. Windows glowed with warm light from inside, and Lisa could see the flickering shadows of flames dancing on the glass. She wanted to run toward it, but her body wouldn't obey. Instead, she half walked, half fell through the snow, using trees and fence posts to support herself when her legs threatened to collapse. The cabin looked like something from a fairy tale, warm and inviting against the harsh winter landscape. But as she got closer, reality began to set in. This wasn't an abandoned shelter where she could take refuge. Someone lived here. Someone was home right now, sitting by that fire, completely unaware that a half-frozen woman with a baby was approaching their door. Lisa had no idea who might be inside or how they would react to unexpected visitors in the middle of a blizzard. She stopped about 20 feet from the front door, suddenly uncertain. What if the person inside was dangerous? What if they refused to help? What if they called the police, thinking she was some kind of criminal? Her mind, clouded by cold and exhaustion, began imagining all sorts of terrible scenarios. But then, her daughter made a small sound, barely more than a whisper, and Lisa looked down to see the baby's face in the light from the cabin windows. Her little girl's skin was pale and cold, her breathing shallow and weak. This wasn't a time for worrying about strangers or social conventions. Her daughter was dying, and Lisa wasn't far behind. She forced herself to move closer to the cabin. Through one of the windows, she could see inside. The room was simple but warm-looking, with a large stone fireplace where logs crackled and burned. She could see the edge of a comfortable chair and what looked like books on a shelf. Everything about the scene spoke of safety and warmth, exactly what she and her daughter desperately needed. Lisa stumbled to the front door, a solid wooden barrier that stood between her and salvation. Her hands were so numb and stiff that she could barely make a fist, let alone knock properly. She tried to rap her knuckles against the wood, but barely any sound came out. Panic rose in her throat. What if the person inside couldn't hear her? What if they ignored the sound, thinking it was just the wind? Using what little strength she had left, Lisa began hitting the door with the flat of her hand. The sound was muffled by her gloves and the howling wind, but it was better than her weak knocking. She hit the door again and again, each impact sending pain shooting through her frozen fingers and upper arms. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible even to herself. "Please help us." She could hear movement inside the cabin now. Footsteps on wooden floors, getting closer to the door. Lisa's heart pounded with a mixture of hope and terror. In just a few seconds, she would come face to face with whoever lived in this remote cabin. They could be her salvation or her doom, and she had no way of knowing which. The footsteps stopped right behind the door. Lisa could imagine the person inside, probably looking through a peephole or listening carefully, trying to figure out who would be crazy enough to be outside in this storm. She pressed her face closer to the door, trying to make her voice stronger. "Please," she called out, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "I have a baby. We need help." She heard the sound of locks being turned, metal sliding against metal. Her legs gave out completely, and she leaned against the door frame for support, still clutching her daughter protectively against her chest. Whatever happened next would determine whether they lived or died. All she could do was hope that whoever opened this door would show mercy to a desperate mother and her child. The door handle began to turn. The door opened slowly, and warm air rushed out to meet Lisa's frozen face. The contrast was so shocking that she gasped, breathing in the heated air like it was medicine. Standing in the doorway was a tall, bearded man who looked to be in his 60s. His gray hair was wild and unkempt, and his weathered face showed the kind of lines that came from years of outdoor living. But his eyes, despite their initial wariness, weren't cruel or dangerous. For a moment, they just stared at each other. The man took in the sight of Lisa leaning against his doorframe, snow-covered and shaking, clutching a bundle of blankets to her chest. She could see his expression change from suspicion to shock to something that might have been compassion. "Dear God," he said, his voice rough but not unkind. "What are you doing out there?" Lisa tried to speak, but only a croaking sound came out. Her lips were so numb from the cold that forming words was almost impossible. She held up the bundle containing her daughter, hoping he would understand without explanation. The man's eyes widened when he realized she was holding a baby. Without another word, he stepped forward and gently took Lisa's arm, helping her inside. The warmth of the cabin hit her like a physical force, and she almost collapsed from the relief of it. Her legs finally gave out completely, and she sank to the wooden floor just inside the door. "Easy there," the man said, kneeling beside her. "You're safe now. Both of you are safe." He closed the door behind her, shutting out the howling wind and swirling snow. The silence that followed was almost as shocking as the warmth. After hours of constant wind and storm, the quiet inside the cabin felt like a miracle. The man helped Lisa over to a large armchair near the fireplace. The heat from the burning logs felt incredible against her frozen skin, though it also made her realize just how cold she had become. Her hands and feet began to throb painfully as feeling slowly returned to them. "Let me see the baby," the man said gently, reaching toward the bundle in Lisa's arms. Lisa's maternal instincts kicked in, and she pulled her daughter closer protectively. She still didn't know who this man was or whether she could trust him. He seemed kind, but appearances could be deceiving. The man noticed her hesitation and took a step back, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "I'm not going to hurt either of you," he said quietly. "But that little one needs help right now, and I know a thing or two about treating hypothermia." Something in his voice convinced Lisa to trust him. Maybe it was exhaustion, or maybe it was the desperate knowledge that her daughter was in serious danger. but she carefully unwrapped the blankets around her baby and let the stranger see her. The man's face grew serious as he looked at the infant. The baby's skin was pale and cold, her lips still that frightening shade of blue. Her breathing was shallow and slow, and she barely responded when the man gently touched her cheek. "She's in bad shape," he said honestly, "but we can help her. I've seen worse." He moved quickly but calmly, like someone who knew exactly what to do in an emergency. From a closet, he pulled out more blankets and what looked like a first aid kit. He spread the blankets near the fireplace, creating a warm nest on the floor. "We need to warm her up gradually," he explained as he worked. "Too fast and it could shock her system. Too slow and ... He didn't finish the sentence, but Lisa understood. The man showed Lisa how to hold her daughter close to her own body while wrapping them both in the warm blankets. He explained that skin-to-skin contact was one of the best ways to raise a baby's body temperature safely. Lisa followed his instructions, grateful to have someone who seemed to know what he was doing. While they worked to warm the baby, the man told Lisa his story. His name was Frank, and he had been a military medic for 20 years before retiring to this remote cabin 5 years ago. He had chosen this isolated life after losing his wife to cancer, wanting to get away from the world and its painful memories. "I came up here to be alone," he said as he prepared warm bottles of water to place around the baby. "Haven't had visitors in months. Most people don't even know this place exists." Frank made Lisa drink warm soup while they waited for her daughter to respond to the treatment. The soup tasted better than anything she had ever eaten, and she could feel it warming her from the inside out. Her thinking became clearer as her body temperature returned to normal, and she was finally able to tell Frank what had happened. She explained about the car accident, the failed phone, and the desperate decision to walk for help. Frank listened without judgment, nodding occasionally as if he understood the impossible choices she had been forced to make. 19 miles, he said when she finished her story. "You walked 19 miles through that storm with a baby. That's incredible." Lisa looked down at her daughter, who was beginning to show signs of improvement. The baby's breathing was deeper now, and some color was returning to her cheeks. Her tiny fingers, which had been frighteningly cold and still, began to move slightly. Frank noticed the improvement too. "She's going to be okay," he said with relief in his voice. "You both are, but it was close. Another hour in that storm. He didn't need to finish." Lisa knew how close they had come to dying out there. If she hadn't seen the light from his cabin, if she had walked past it in the darkness, if Frank hadn't been the kind of person who would help a stranger in need, any of those things could have changed the outcome completely. As the night wore on, Frank continued to monitor both Lisa and her daughter. He checked their temperatures, made sure they stayed hydrated, and gradually increased the warmth around them as their bodies recovered from the hypothermia. He worked with the quiet efficiency of someone who had dealt with medical emergencies. Many times before, Lisa learned more about Frank as the hours passed. He had been living alone in the cabin since his retirement, growing his own food in the summer and hunting in the winter. He had an emergency radio for contacting the outside world, but he rarely used it. This cabin had become his refuge from a world that had taken too much from him. But as he cared for Lisa and her baby, something in Frank began to change. The careful, professional way he treated their injuries reminded him of who he used to be, someone who helped people, someone who made a difference. For the first time in years, he felt useful again. "Why did you help us?" Lisa asked him as her daughter slept peacefully in her arms. Frank was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "Because that's what people do," he said finally. "Or what they should do anyway. You help when you can." Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside the warm cabin, 2 lives had been saved by the kindness of a stranger who had chosen to care when he could have simply closed his door. The storm finally began to weaken on the second morning. Lisa woke up in Frank's spare bed, her daughter sleeping peacefully beside her. For a moment she forgot where she was, then the memories came flooding back. The car accident, the terrible walk through the blizzard, and Frank's unexpected kindness. She could hear him moving around in the kitchen, the smell of coffee and bacon drifting through the small cabin. Her daughter was doing much better. The baby's skin had returned to a healthy pink color, and she was nursing normally again. The frightening blue tinge around her lips was completely gone, and she seemed alert and responsive. Lisa knew they had both come incredibly close to dying. Out there in the snow, Frank appeared in the doorway with a cup of coffee. "Storm's clearing up," he said, settling into a chair beside the bed. "I was able to reach the rescue services on my radio this morning. They're sending a helicopter as soon as the visibility improves." Lisa felt mixed emotions at this news. She was relieved that help was coming, but she also felt sad about leaving Frank. Over the past 2 days, she had learned so much about this quiet man who had saved their lives. He had told her about his years in the military, about his wife, who had died too young, and about how he had retreated to this cabin to escape his grief. "I don't know how to thank you," Lisa said, holding her daughter close. "You saved our lives." Frank shook his head. "You saved your own life and hers too. Walking 19 miles through that storm. I've seen grown soldiers who wouldn't have made it half that distance." As they waited for the rescue helicopter, Frank and Lisa continued talking. She learned that he had been struggling with depression and loneliness since moving to the cabin. He rarely spoke to other people, barely taking care of himself, just going through the motions of living without really being alive. I forgot what it felt like to help someone, Frank admitted as they watched the baby play with her fingers. "For the past 5 years, I've just been existing, hiding from the world and feeling sorry for myself. But these past 2 days, taking care of you both, it reminded me who I used to be." Lisa could see the change in him. When she had first arrived at his door, Frank had seemed worn down and tired, like someone who had given up on life. But now, there was light in his eyes again, energy in his movements. Helping them had given him a sense of purpose he had been missing. Around noon, they heard the distant sound of helicopter blades cutting through the air. Frank's radio crackled to life, and a voice announced that the rescue team was approaching his coordinates. Lisa felt her heart speed up with excitement and nervousness about returning to the outside world. Frank helped her gather the few belongings she had, making sure the baby was bundled up warmly for the helicopter ride. As they prepared to leave, Lisa noticed how quiet he had become. She realized that once they left, he would be alone again in his cabin. With nothing but his thoughts and memories for company, the helicopter landed in the clearing outside Frank's cabin, its rotors whipping up snow and creating a miniature blizzard. 2 paramedics jumped out and rushed toward them, medical bags in hand. They quickly examined both Lisa and her daughter, checking their vital signs and asking questions about their condition. "They're both in remarkable shape considering what they've been through," one of the paramedics told Frank. "You did an excellent job treating them. Are you medical personnel?" Frank nodded. "Former Army medic?" The paramedics looked impressed. "Well, you definitely saved their lives. A few more hours in that storm, and this would have been a very different story." As they prepared to load Lisa and the baby into the helicopter, she grabbed Frank's hand. "Come with us," she said urgently. "You don't have to stay here alone anymore." Frank looked surprised. "I can't just leave. This is my home." "But it doesn't have to be your prison," Lisa said. "You have so much to offer. Look what you did for us. There are other people who need your help, your skills, your kindness." Frank was quiet for a long moment, looking around at the cabin that had been both his refuge and his cage for the past 5 years. Lisa could see him struggling with the decision, torn between the safety of isolation and the scary possibility of rejoining the world. One of the paramedics approached them. "Sir, we could use someone with your medical experience. We're always looking for qualified people, especially with wilderness training. If you're interested, I can put you in touch with our supervisor." Frank looked at Lisa, then at her daughter, who was smiling up at him with bright, curious eyes. In that moment, something shifted in his expression. The fear and hesitation faded, replaced by determination. "Okay," he said quietly. "Let me pack a few things." 20 minutes later, Frank locked his cabin door and climbed into the helicopter, beside Lisa and her daughter. As they lifted off, Lisa watched him looking down at the place that had been his home for 5 years. She could see both sadness and relief in his face. The flight to the hospital took less than an hour, compared to the 19-mile journey that had nearly cost Lisa and her daughter their lives. As they flew over the route Lisa had walked, she could see her abandoned car still buried in snow beside the road. The sight of it made her shiver, remembering how close they had come to tragedy. At the hospital, doctors confirmed that both Lisa and her baby were going to be fine. They were amazed by the story of her journey through the blizzard and full of praise for Frank's medical care. Lisa's sister arrived that evening, crying with relief as she hugged her sister and met her niece for the first time. Over the following weeks, Frank began his new life. He moved to a small apartment in town and started working part-time with the local emergency response team. His experience with wilderness medicine and his calm demeanor made him valuable to the rescue services. More importantly, he was helping people again, which gave his life meaning and purpose. Lisa visited Frank often, bringing her daughter to see the man who had saved their lives. She watched him transform from the lonely, isolated person she had first met into someone who was engaged with life again. He had found his way back to the world, just as he had helped her find her way to safety. 6 months later, Frank started a program to train other veterans in wilderness first aid, using his cabin as a base for weekend courses. The remote location that had once been his hiding place became a resource for teaching others how to save lives in emergency situations. "You know," Frank told Lisa during one of her visits, "I thought I was saving you that night. But really, you saved me. You reminded me that there's still good I can do in this world, people I can help." Lisa smiled, watching her daughter take her first wobbly steps across Frank's apartment floor. "I think we saved each other," she said. "Sometimes that's how it works. Sometimes the people who need rescuing the most are the ones doing the rescuing." The blizzard that had threatened to end their lives had instead brought them together and changed both their futures in ways neither could have imagined.